Be the right club. Be the right club today. Yes!
Again, has to be careful of the speed.
What a comeback season for Hal Sutton.
Come right back toward the hole. How about in? That's the second eagle he's made it for this week.
17 years later, Hal Sutton is the Players' Champion.
He's got it going right at the flagstick. It'll be up. It is.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Be the Right Club Today podcast. Hal, it was a pretty exciting British Open.
It was. Colin played great. Jordan, had everybody's hopes up that he was fixing to win another major, and exciting for everybody to watch.
Every putt that Jordan hit, I felt like he was going to make it. Like it was kind of old school Jordan, right? Like every putt looked like it had the right speed, right line. Looked like he was going to hole every one of them.
Yeah, he's uncanny with a putter when it starts going his way.
Somebody on Twitter posted something about Louis and used the choke word, and I've always struggled with that word. Like the Van de Velde situation, or having a 6 or 7 shot lead. Like you could say Greg Norman at the Masters, that was kind of a choke job, even though Faldo played great on Sunday. Like Louis that's not choke. He just didn't play his best. Like what are your thoughts?
Well, he's put himself in position to win a lot, and he didn't really do anything wrong. And he just didn't play that well. And, he played so good all year long. I mean, I'd have a hard time saying that he choked on anything.
What would your message be to Louis?
Keep doing it.
Yeah, just keep putting yourself in position.
Just keep putting yourself in position. Keep stringing one good shot next to another good shot next to another one.
Yeah.
And accept the fact that you're going to hit a few bad ones and move on and start stringing them together again.
And I think it would be worse if he hadn't already won a major.
Yeah.
If he was in, whether it was Westwood Shoes or Sergio at one point, right? Never had won a major, it'd be the heat would be on him a little bit more. But he's already won. He's just been playing really good golf and just didn't happen to have his best on Sunday.
Yeah. I've enjoyed watching Louis play golf this year. He's been in contention in all the majors, and as a golfer, a former player, I'd love to say I was in contention in all 4 majors. Wouldn't you like to say that? I'm sure all of y'all out there would love to say that.
Absolutely.
Instead of criticize someone that actually did it.
That's right. And one of the fun facts about Louis, too, is every time he plays great, or he likes to use his excess tour winnings to buy more tractors for his farm. So he hops on the tractor and goes and plows the field or whatever he's doing.
Maybe something we should say here is Louis got a nice balanced life.
Yeah.
It sounds like he works on that, and
it's awesome. He's got a balanced golf game. He's good just about everywhere. He used to be a weak putter, and he was number one in putting this year or last year on the tour, and so he doesn't have any major weaknesses. That's for sure.
No, I bet if he keeps doing the same thing, he's going to win another major.
Yeah. It'd be hard to bet against him. So perfect segue to our guest this week. I'll let you lead into him.
Well, one of my oldest, longest friends, Nick Price, Hall of Fame player. Nick and I go back so far. We talk about it in some of the podcasts today. So y'all enjoy Nick.
All right, our next guest on the Be the Right Club Today podcast is Mr. Nick Price. Nick has won 48 times worldwide, 18 times on the PGA Tour, owner of one of the most iconic golf swings. I know one that my instructors revered with working with me and used him as a model with my game. And also he's our first World Golf Hall of Fame member to come on the podcast. So Nick, welcome on.
Hey, thanks, Chase. Good to be with you and Hal.
Well, Nick, you and I go back a long ways. I was thinking about this. The first time I met Nick Price was at the Junior World in 1974. You won it, didn't you?
I did. And you know what's funny? We were out at Torrey Pines for the U.S. Open. And there's a picture in the pro shop there of me. And I mean, it's kind of hard to believe it was, 1974. What's that, 47 years ago.
It is, we're getting of age to where the number is a big number if we look at our early wins a long time ago.
Let's put it this way, at age where reminiscing is good. If we can remember.
If we can remember, yes. Isn't that something? So, Chase, you got the first question. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and I actually want to ask both of you this question, because both of you were known as world-class ball strikers. Let's talk about the art of great ball striking. How did you guys both get here? Nick, how did you become known as one of the best ball strikers? Is it a little bit of story growing up? Is it how did you get to be such a precise iron player, such a ball striker?
I grew up in very benign conditions in Zimbabwe. We had very little wind. We were at altitude. And when I first went to sea level, it was a bit of a shock to me, because obviously the wind and the conditions were a little different. But I remember distinctly when I was about 13 years old, we had a guy back home called Simon Hobday, who was probably the best golfer we had in our country at the time. And he was playing on the European tour and the South African tour at that time. Wonderful ball striker. Anyway, I sat behind him on the practice tee one day while he was hitting balls. And I asked him, I said, Simon, one of the things that I'd really like to do is hit the ball like you do. I mean, how do I do that? And he said to me, he pointed to the middle of the club and he said, if you hit the ball out the middle of the club more than the guy you're playing against, eventually you're going to beat him. And that was great words of advice, very simple, but it's true. The guys who are the best putters hit the ball out the middle of the putter more often than the guys who are bad putters. So it applies to the long game as well. So that was one of the things that I realized, I got to wear the middle of the club face out if I'm going to do any good at this game.
Hal?
I think his opening remark there was a big reason why I felt like I grew up in Shreveport. We had fairly benign conditions and didn't play in a whole lot of wind. So worked on the golf swing every day, just like Nick did, and tried to hit the middle of the face with it. I tried to stay on top of the ball. So did Nick try to stay on top of the ball. We weren't trying to get under it all the time. And that opens a can of worms when you start that process.
So, Nick, if you had all the shot link data and all the stats that all these guys have, what would you have said your 2 or 3 biggest strengths and say your 2 or 3 biggest weaknesses were?
I think the ability to drive the ball. I just, some people are born naturally good putters, good chippers, good whatever you want to call iron players, long iron players. Some guys naturally hit the ball high, others naturally hit the ball low. I just love the driver. I will absolutely love the fact that I could have a clean golf ball that was dry, teed up on a perfect height that I selected, and was on the flattest part of probably the golf course, which is the teeing ground. So to me, even though the club in those days was 43 inches long, it just, from my simple thinking, was something that I think you had more control over than anything else out on the golf course. You could tee up on the right-hand side of the tee. You could tee up on the left-hand side of the tee. You could angle which way you wanted to hit your drive. So to me, I was really lucky because driving was one of the real strong points in my game. And then I would say my iron play, sort of ball flight, iron play, and the ability to hit the ball out the center of the club, as I spoke about with Hobday, probably more often than the guys I was playing against. So that was, I would say, ball flight was a great thing. When I first met Ben Hogan, I asked him, I said, what's the most important thing to you when you play golf? And we didn't talk about swing or anything. I just wanted to get his perspective. And he said to me, controlling the ball flight is the art of the game. And he said that if you do that, it's very hard for anyone to hide pins away from you. So if you want to hit the ball a little further, a little higher, a little bit of a draw, you want to hit a little shorter, a little cut, a little lower, ball doesn't carry it that far. So you're never really left with a hole in your iron game. So, we got 10 yards between clubs. I think the modern day guys now are probably more like 15 or 20. But, you know, when you got an in-between yardage, you're always not sure whether to hit club longer, harder, or softer. So that was one of the things that I learned from him.
So, Nick, when you were in between clubs, I know it's all circumstantial, but did you find you hit the bigger club or the less club more often?
Under pressure, less club. Definitely. As you know, I had an upbeat tempo, and I always I wanted to hit the ball harder under pressure. And there was always adrenaline. So, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, when there wasn't as much pressure, I would probably try and hit little soft cuts and that. But under pressure, give me that little knockdown, draw, or cut. And that was my bread and butter. Go with it.
One of the things that I always find fascinating with guys like you and Hal that hit it so well was, you know, how you managed, let's call it expectation management with your putter. And what I mean by that is you guys would get hot and hit it to 10 to 12 feet on 14, 15, 16 holes. And from, you know, like what we're learning with all the stats and all the, you know, decade and all these mathematical systems out there, we're learning that the make percentage from that distance is just not that high. It's 40, 30, 20% at times at 15 feet. And when we work with juniors and the juniors that start to hit it a little bit better and start to become really good ball strikers, their parents will say, man, they're just missing so many putts. And I'm like, well, think about it. They just have more missable putts than they did when they missed the green and chipped it to 3 or 4 feet. Did you find that? Like, how did you, this one's always a fascinating topic to me. How did you guys manage that aspect of it?
You know, for me, I don't know. I grew up on slow, grainy greens. And so I was more of a pop stroke putter. I would pop the ball because, you know, the greens I grew up, as I say, were slow. But when I came over here and there was so much, there was so little grain, you know, maybe a little bit, obviously in Florida in summertime there's grain, but, you know, during the season we played winter in Florida and then going over to the West Coast in sort of the spring. There wasn't a lot of grain on the greens there, but there was a lot of slope. So it wasn't so much about line, it was more about speed. And I was never really a good speed putter on very quick greens. It was difficult for me. But, you know, if I got on greens that didn't have a lot of slope and were, you know, sort of maybe 12 and a half on the stimp meter, that was always my strength. When they got above 12 and a half, 13, you know, 13 and a half with a lot of break, I just never really putted that well. And I think that comes from, you know, where you grow up and having that imagination. But you're 100% right. I think if you have a look at the amount of 20-footers, 15, 20-footers that the average guy makes, it's not that many. It really isn't. But, you know, you've got to hit the ball well. I think in our time, before our time, and nowadays, you've got to give yourself as many birdie opportunities as you possibly can if you're going to succeed at this game.
Well, one of the misleading things about everybody that's out there listening right now is they watch golf on Saturday and Sunday afternoon, and TV is following the guys that are making all the putts. And, you know, so they see a lot of putts and they just automatically assume that everybody's doing it. Set them straight, Nick. No, it's not happening for everybody.
Well, the only one that I saw consistently make, well, I saw a few guys, but of modern times now is Jordan Spieth. I've never seen anyone putt the ball like he does. It's so beautiful to watch. And, you know, the nice thing about it, he doesn't take an hour and a half to hit a putt. He's like you and I. He gets over it, takes a couple of putting strokes and looks at the hole and bam, in it goes. Wow. Absolutely wonderful to watch. But you're right. You know, there's a lot of missed putts before TV comes on. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Nick, we've talked a lot about, and you've mentioned it too, talked a lot about how we grew up and our stories growing up and how it influenced us. You know, we had Brad Faxon on, and Faxon talked about how he grew up hitting a lot of chips and pitches and just that's what he wanted to do. Just like you grew up on slow, bumpy greens and you were a little bit better on those little slow greens. In a perfect world, if we could raise every junior in a certain situation or a certain circumstances of different situations, how would you do it? What would be the perfect way to raise kids to play, to have success in the modern game?
That's a hard question nowadays because there's so much of an emphasis on distance. You know, I think when Hal and I grew up, and certainly the generation before us, there was a more shot variety that was required. And I'm not saying that the guys don't have the shot variety, because they've got great shot variety. But What we did, we had to do it with, I think, a golf ball that wasn't quite as forgiving as the golf ball that is used today, and the clubs that weren't quite as forgiving as the ones today. But you want every generation to learn to play the complete game, from driving the ball, hitting the ball as far as you can, as straight as you can, hitting good long irons, have a complete game. If you look at Colin Morikawa, I mean, I watched him on Saturday and Sunday at the Open Championship last weekend. And, not only is he a great ball striker, but he's a wonderful tactician on the golf course and strategist. You hardly ever see him miss a ball on the low side or short side himself. He would always err to the middle of the green. If the pin was cut right and the trouble was right, he'd be left of the pin. So those sort of things you learn over a period of time. But having that full skill set to succeed, I think, has changed a lot in the last 30 years, because it's huge now about distance off the tee. And is that a good thing? Well, I don't know. It's attracting a lot of people, and golf's very popular right now. But it's a different kind of game. We see more tee shots being hit, I think, than ever before. And with the TrackMan and seeing, this one's gone 340 yards, that one's hit a long way. Who's hit the longest drive here today? It's not who's hit the best iron shot in here today, or anyway, it's just different. And so I would always say, golf course, growing up on a course like Hilton Head or Colonial, that's the kind of golf. Those are the kind of golf courses that make guys have a complete game, because you have to drive it straight, you have to hit it, good iron shots, and both those courses will test your full repertoire of short game shots.
Favorite golf course in the world, favorite golf course in the United States?
Muirfield in Scotland, where we play the Open Championship, I think is probably one of the greatest design golf courses I've ever played in my life. United States, I've always enjoyed Pine Valley. Pine Valley's been one of my great places to go and play. But there's so many good ones over here. Obviously, when I won the PGA at Bellerive, that was very special for me. The one at Southern Hills was very important, obviously. But I love TPC, where you won twice. To me, that was a wonderful ball strikers / strategists golf course, because if you try to bite off more than you could chew on that golf course, you'd get stung really badly. So if you used your brain and you hit the ball solid, you were going to play well around there. But Hilton Head, as I say, Colonial, this Riviera. I mean, there's just so many great courses over here.
Nick, you've talked about it a little bit, but let's go a little deeper into thoughts on the state of today's game.
Well, every generation does something that's exceptional. And, if you have a look over the years, Bobby Jones was outstanding. I mean, the guy was he was so far ahead of his time, as was Tiger Woods, as was Jack Nicklaus, and there was the emphasis on length in the game now, I think it's not going the right way as far as I'm concerned. There's never been a prerequisite in golf, in the history of golf, to succeed as a champion, whether it's an amateur, whether it's a junior, whether it's a professional, whatever it may be. There's never been an emphasis on one thing so much as there is on distance right now, which is kind of sad. And if you look at the cross-section on the USGA, we got some stats about the average prize money of per distance, or average in driving distance. And I think, and these numbers aren't 100% accurate, but you get the gist of it. If you were 270 to 285, the median income for the guys on the tour was like $350,000. If you went from 285 to 300, that number doubled, maybe even tripled. Then when you went from 300 to 315, that number doubled again, or added another 50% on. But if you were in over 315 yards, you were making 4.5 million, or 3.5 million was the median income for the guys hitting it that far. So what that means is that there's now a prerequisite to stay on tour, which is if you don't hit it 300 yards, you're not going to be able to play on the PGA Tour. And I think that's a sad thing, because if you have a look, guys like Gene Sarazen, even Hogan wasn't a long hitter of the ball. Gary Player wasn't a long hitter of the ball. Corey Pavin, one of the greatest. I mean, the guy, you want to talk about a guy who got more out of his game than anyone I ever saw in my life, was Corey Pavin. But, great players, these guys, guys who won major championships. Are we now saying to the world, okay, well, if you don't hit it 320 yards, you can't succeed? Now, that's not 100% true, because guys are still winning on tour that don't hit it a long way. But in the major championships and all the tournaments that really, really are important, distance is just such an advantage. So that's the thing that I'm sort of just not happy with right now. I would like to see more, just more guys who don't hit the ball 300 yards, 350 yards compete in the majors.
So, Hal, go ahead.
Well, I can't agree with him any more than I'm sitting here agreeing with him. I mean, this is not, I hate to call us old, Nick, but this is not two old guys from the past that are sitting here being
critical.
Critical. Yes, we're not. And these are facts. This is, right. There's never before been a time where you had to have one area of the game or you couldn't play the game.
Right.
And that's what you were just saying. And, we played with guys that were really long that you didn't feel like they had the advantage on you, because you knew other parts of your game were going to equalize things, right, if not give you the advantage, Now, all of a sudden, if you don't have the link that you're talking about and describing here, the other parts of your game can't make up the difference in the important tournaments.
It's very tough to, So, and I think we got to look at, there's, and another interesting stat, that we keep at the USGA was from 1930 to 1996, in 66 years, the ball averaged a 1 foot per year increase. So that's 22 yards over 66 years. From 97 to 2005, I think it was, that distance doubled. So we saw a quantum leap in that very short space of time, that the ball just started going a long way. It was the equipment. It wasn't just the ball. It's a lot of things. Conditioning, the guys are better at. I want to say generally across the board, guys are more into conditioning than perhaps we were. But we still had some phenomenal athletes in our time. Greg Norman, Faldo. There were lots of guys who worked out just as hard as these guys do in the gym. But what's the problem when we have that quantum leap in distance in such a short period of time? It's the golf courses, because the golf courses can't keep up, and the golf courses don't have a voice. They don't. Are we going to lose? I'm sort of jumping ahead here a little bit. All of our great venues in golf, because the ball and the distance is becoming, such a factor in it. Guys, people like Augusta are really lucky; they can add length. But there's some great courses like Marion and Medina. It's very hard for those guys to add length to those courses. So I want to see, the great thing about major championships and this game is that they go back and are tested at the same venues year after year after year after year. And I would hate to see courses like Pebble Beach being taken out of the rotation, because there's no such thing as a par five. Guys are hitting drive 6 irons to the par fives. So I think that's what you got to look at for the long term.
So I know you've got a role at the USGA now, and you're reeling off a few facts here from the USGA. Explain what your role is. And I want to say, I'm excited that people like you have a voice at the USGA, because that's never been the case before. And I mean, people like yourself that have played the game at a really high level, I mean, you're not protecting your records, you're protecting golf.
I always remember talking to Arnold Palmer about, and listening to him speak about things. And, one of the great lines that he had in when he spoke about this wonderful game, he would always say, is this best for the game? Is what we're talking about best for the game of golf? And I think that's such a key thing right now as we look, as is this distance that is, getting where the ball's going so far, is this good for the game of golf? We can debate that ad infinitum. But for me, I had an opportunity to sit on the exec committee. Mike Davis was very instrumental in asking me and getting me on board. Originally it was going to be just a 2-year gig for me, but it's ended up now I'm in the middle of my 4th year. But basically, I think I've hopefully given them a different perspective on, some of the insights that we as professional golfers see as opposed to the amateur side. And I think Jason Gore's now on board, which is great. I like to feel I was instrumental in helping in getting him into a position with the USGA. And he's done a wonderful job as a go-between the USGA and the PGA Tour. But the 2 committees that I sit on, one is the championship committee, which is do we do course setup, and the other thing is the equipment standards committee. So those are sort of my 2 major roles with the USGA now, and it's a lot of fun. I've got to meet some wonderful people, and I've learned an awful lot about the technical side of the game, the course setup, and that. But they're very, very good and accomplished people who take care of and do what they do with the USGA.
So Nick, what's the answer? What's if you were in charge, where do we go?
I think we got to peel it back slowly. This didn't happen overnight, but I think we got to. Now, I'm not saying we go back to where Hal and I were, but I think if you try and draw a line in the sand now, I don't think that's going to help. It's going to be something that needs to be reviewed, say every 4 or 5 years. How do we control to keep the price of everything on the golf course? These golf courses are now, as they get bigger and bigger, are becoming more and more expensive to maintain. We're using more water. It's costing more to purchase, maintain the property, the golf course. And unfortunately, what it's doing is that it's pricing a lot of people out of the game. A lot of the municipal, privately owned daily fee courses, they're all being made redundant. And a lot of them are where kids from the inner city would play are closing down and being sold because the guys can't make a go of it. So we have to look at the long-term ramifications of what distance is doing. I'll give you an example. If you have a guy who has a daily fee golf course and he has 12 tee times, 120 minutes on each side. Let's say, for example, he has 10 minutes of tee times on 120-minute, 10-minute intervals on the front 9 and the back 9, both morning and afternoon. If he has one guy on each side in the morning and on both 9s, so 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, who hit it 350 yards. Now, they don't have to be great players. These are just youngsters who are hitting it. They might be 18-year-old players. They may be, 18 handicaps or whatever. But on 14 holes outside of the par 3s, they have to wait for the group in front of them who are hitting at 200 to walk 120 yards before they hit their tee shots. So how long does it take to walk 120 yards? Call it 2 minutes, a minute and a half. So if you times that by 14, that's 28 minutes. He's losing almost, 3 or 2.5 starting times on each side, both morning and afternoon. So you count that up. You figure out how many. So 16 is he losing 32 players, 32 of revenue. Right?
Yeah, in green fees.
In green fees. So a lot of those places, a lot of those clubs run on about a 10, maybe a 15% profit margin of turnover. So if you take 30 people out of that guy's golf each day, out of how many, if he's running 200, that's, 15%. He's losing. That is what takes him into the red. And, a lot of times that course will close down because the guy just can't afford it. And we're seeing this more and more, I think, with, people just out there on golf courses, and the rounds are taking longer.
I've never heard that take on the distance side. That's kind of interesting. What's also interesting to me is how many, and Hal can attest to this, how many, say, scratch to 10 handicappers, 15 handicappers are coming here and say, Chase, I'm a great iron player. I still can't hit the driver. And on you guys' side, on the PGA Tour side, it's like, well, the driver's the easiest club in the hit now because the ball doesn't curve and it just goes miles and it goes forever. But all these guys come in here and they still can't hit it. So I think it attests to the fact that this game is just still really hard and that you guys were obviously just really good at it, and the guys on tour. Couple of things that I've got, I want both of you guys to take on. Number one, British Open, we had the top three guys weren't super long, right? Jordan Spieth, Morikawa's not Dustin Johnson long, or Bryson or any of those guys. And then Louis doesn't, I mean, he's I say average.
He's sneaky long,
right? He's not short. Where I would go back to, because you kind of mentioned that 275 to 285, 290 length. And it's funny because we've tweeted and Instagrammed out a bunch of these kind of stats. Like if you hit it farther, you have a chance to make more money. Wouldn't you guys say that going back to your era, if you're only hitting at 240, you don't have much of a chance to compete at that level, right? Or whatever that number is, if it's a little less or whatever. But, from, 1975 to 1985, the average driving distance was 272 or 275, whatever it was. We looked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or actually about 5 years ago, it got up to 290. So the whole average has jumped up 20 yards. Is 275 short now? Yes. It wasn't short in you guys' era, but 245 or 250 was fairly short back then. So, as a group, everybody's hitting it longer. And you made the same argument that Hal's been making forever about the courses becoming obsolete. And I think that's a great argument. But my whole thing is, if you take Bryson and Cameron Champ out of the mix, those guys are hitting it way too far, right?
Mm-hmm.
The group has gotten a lot longer, but you're still seeing, it's still, shot making is still kind of happening. So if we remove the obsolete golf courses, is it that bad of a problem that we're having to where only the longest guys are winning? Because obviously, Bryson, St. George, hurt Bryson a little bit. Dustin Johnson didn't win. Cameron Champ did, and the guys that hit it miles, Rory, they didn't win. So, where do we go? What do we, again, what do we do?
I think when Hal and I were playing, there was one really important stat, and that was total driving. And total driving was when you added the distance off the tee, an average distance, and the amount of fairways hit. And it was really uncanny because the guys who were in the top 10 of total driving, okay, so combined fairways and distance, were invariably the guys who were the top players at the time. Now, the guys who are hitting 35-40% of the fairways are in the top part of the game now. So if a guy now hits at 270 and he's hitting 78-80% of the fairways, he's not rewarded because the other guy's hitting 9-irons and wedges to par fours, where this other guy is hitting 6s and 5-irons perhaps. You can play against a guy who gets penalized for missing the fairway, but it's very hard to play against a guy who misses the fairway and can still get the ball on the green. And that's what we've seen. Obviously, the grooves are a big issue. When we went from V, we went to square grooves, and now we've gone back to U grooves, which allow a guy to put enough spin with a short iron, 8-9 pitching wedge out of the rough and stop the ball on the green. In our day, and before us, if you hit it in the first cut of rough, and you got a flyer, I mean, you couldn't control the ball like the guys can control the ball out of the rough now. So that kind of balances that, if you get my point. Two guys hit at 240 and we were hitting at 260. He had a 20-yard two-club disadvantage. But if he hit it in the fairway 14 or 13 times, which obviously it is easier to do if you hit at 240 as opposed to 260, he had the opportunity to attack a lot of the flags and not have guys making pars and birdies out of the rough. We were penalized when we hit it in the rough.
So, Nick, what is your take? I've continually said I'd like to see the ball spin more. If we saw the ball spin more, you'd see more shot making. You'd see more thinking going into it. The hardest shot in the world is a force carry over water into a 20-mile-an-hour wind with a ball of spin. You know that as well as I do. They don't suffer from those things anymore like we did. And I'm not saying they need to suffer from things that we did. I'm just saying it would change the game instantly if the ball spun more.
And you know what? I agree. I think there's a lot of things that, we could do, to make the game just, or let's put it this way, where guys wouldn't freewheel it off the tee as much as they're doing now. I watch some of the guys just pounding balls. You probably saw that video of Bryson at Augusta where just for like an hour and a half, he was just standing there hitting it as hard as he possibly could and not really too concerned about how straight the ball was going. He was looking at his numbers. You know, and I thought if he had won Augusta last year or this year and all the kids had watched that, all you were going to see were all these youngsters just standing on the practice tee with TrackMans, hitting it and swinging it as hard as they can. But I think there's a lot of little things that can be done with the clubs, with the ball, you know, all sorts of things. But no, I don't think it's like we're going retro. It's just that let's put little checks in now, see how those checks work out. You know, no one's ever going to take 25, 30 yards off the ball. That's impossible. We've seen that increment over a 10, 12-year span from that 96 to 2007, 2008. So you can't just lop that all off in one fell swoop. You go at it little bit, you know, and you know, the manufacturers, I think, need to get on board with this too. I think it's be really important for them to you know, and again, I go back to what Arnold Palmer said, what's good for the game. Okay, if everyone thinks the game doesn't need to change now, well, so be it. But it's something that we can debate for a long time. And I think the expense of the maintenance and, as I say, what it costs to purchase the land now with these golf courses going from 7,000 to 7,700, you know what? Another 10 years, it's going to be 8,000. There's no doubt about it, because these young kids, the college kids, are being taught to hit the ball further and create more speed. And it's going to be a prerequisite to get on the tour. Either hit it 300 yards or you're not going to be on tour.
Well, you're talking to one of them right here that can hit it 300 something. Chase, 345, 350, he's capable of that. So
crooked though. It's crooked. Yeah. That's the problem. It goes offline too much.
Well, you know, that's not really hurting anything right now.
One of the arguments that people always, you know, when I get so excited about talking about equipment, is they say, well, you know, guys go out there to watch the guys hit it, you know, so far and whatever. And I said, well, the average guy doesn't really know the difference between 350 and 320. You know what I'm saying? He gets on the tee there. It's something that he can't do anyway. You know, the average guy is going out to watch golf because it's always thrown in my face. Oh, well, if you reduce distance, we're going to lose crowds and whatever. That's not true at all, you know. So I'm just saying, throwing out a number there, taking it from 340 to 320 or to 315 or whatever it may be. You know, 300-yard drive is still a prodigious hit.
Well, we've talked about the golf, what the USGA can do long enough. Let's talk about your golf swing and your relationship with David Ledbetter a little bit.
Well, I was, you know, David and I played junior golf together. He's 4 years older than I am, and I had an older brother, and so David was right in between us. But I ended up playing golf with him. I think I was 11 years old, and I was really impressed because he was a good player for 15 years old, and in fact, he was a good player, you know, throughout his early career as a professional. He just had a habit of throwing. You know, we'd play a 3-round tournament and he'd shoot 2 rounds in the 60s and 178 in it. And he could never, ever find the consistency that he needed to play. And he turned to teaching. Anyway, cut a long story short, he came to America here in 81, and Dennis Watson, who was a contemporary of mine, came back to South Africa to play on the South African tour. And he'd played his first year here in America, and I was playing in Europe. And I was struggling with my game. I was really having a tough time. And I looked at Dennis and I said, my goodness. I said, what have you done to your swing? Everything just looks so good. And he said, well, you know, I've been working with David, and he's worked on my setup and he worked on this and whatever. So I said, well, where is he? And anyway, he was in Florida. And so I phoned him, and in the February or January of 82. And he said, come on over. And so I came over to a place called Greenleaf, which is here in Central Florida. And I spent 6 weeks with him initially. And it was the first time I'd ever analyzed my golf swing, or had anyone analyze my golf swing on video. And I looked at it and I nearly threw up. I thought there were more moves in there than I had so steep going back, and then flattened out too much on the way down. And David really helped me to you know, get my to tighten up my swing plane and to turn a little bit more around my body, as opposed to getting up and away and then flattening out too much. So, and so he got me to do this drill with an 8-iron. And for about 3 weeks, I did nothing but to do this drill with this 8-iron. just to sort of get the muscle memory back out of it. And it helped me with my playing, and it helped me with everything. And I started seeing some change. I started hitting the ball a little further. I started seeing a little more efficiency out of my golf swing. My shot pattern was getting tighter. I wasn't hitting the ball off the charts as much. And then, after that was in April, May of 1982. And in July, 3 months later, after my first real good lessons with him, I was leading the British Open with 6 holes to play. So I kind of knew I was on the right track. Anyway, well, one thing led to another. I made a couple of blunders coming in and ended up finishing second at the Open Championship. But I was 25 years old, and I was so buoyed by my success in such a short space of time with David. And so I knew I was doing the right thing. So anyway, I solidified our friendship. We solidified our friendship. I practiced. I mean, I almost lived in the guy's back pocket for about a year and a half. And he would come to all the tournaments, and he helped me immensely. And then, August of 83, right after you won the PGA, I ended up winning the World Series. And so you and I both got 10-year exemptions in such a short space of time, which was like a godsend in those days, wasn't it? I mean, in a profession where we had no guarantees, we suddenly had 10-year exemptions.
Yeah. I hate reminiscing a little bit, but we're going to take this for a minute. Nick, we played an awful lot of practice rounds together, and it seemed like a lot of Tuesdays we were out together. I miss those days, man. It was, I guess the hardest part about us growing old and not playing competitive golf anymore is we don't see our friends as much as we did.
Exactly. Yeah, and I remember Colbert he came to the Rothwell. We took a lot of cash off him over the years. I still remember you always used to say, "Bring whoever you want, we'll handle you guys." And then he brought Tom Watson. Remember, he brought Tom Watson to the PGA Championship in '85 at Cherry Hills, and I think we cleaned them out of about $1,000, which was a fortune in those days.
Yeah, that was fun, wasn't it?
It was fun. Yeah, we had a great time, man. I mean, it was a lot of fun.
So, Nick, did you work with David through your whole career? Did you ever get any other opinions? Did you guys ever have, the coach player relationship can get stale after a little bit? So how'd all that kind of work out?
I spoke to a lot of other guys about the golf swing. Butch Harmon and a few of the other guys, Jim McLean down there, but I never really had a lesson with him. But, every time I would go and hit balls, guys would come up and talk to me about what I'm working on and everything. And so, I think, a pupil-teacher relationship is something that is something that works both ways. You have to have like a melding or, together. One of the things that I learned from an early times with Ledbetter was that if I didn't like something he was teaching me or helping me with, I'd say, give me something else that creates the same feel. So whether you're left-handed or a right-handed dominated, left-eyed, right-eyed, whatever it may be, you've got to try and figure out when he gives you a drill or when he gives you something to do, if it doesn't feel good, chuck it out and try and get something that'll create the same thing. So the guys that I always felt I know I'm digressing here, but the guys I always felt had a problem were the ones that just sort of regimentally stuck to whatever David was telling them. They said, I tried that with him and it never really worked. And, in fact, my game got worse. And I said, well, did you try anything outside of that? Did you get into the peripheries of that, whatever it may be? So, it was that's the one thing with the teachers. You have to have that relationship where you can turn around to the guy and say, I don't like what you're telling me. I'm not going to just stick to it just because you're David Leadbetter or you're Butch Harmon. You have to show me, and if it's something that I can't remember day in and day out and replicate day in and day out, then it's going to be hard for me to do. So, to pull the gun, pull the trigger under pressure, which is what it all eventually comes down to is, any chink, any flaws or, loose ends you may have in your golf swing, under pressure just get enhanced and get exaggerated. And, for me, for example, it was always getting a little quick in my backswing. So I'd always try and make my backswing a little smooth. But you learn all of those things over a period of time.
Hal, thoughts?
I was a little bit different than that. I bounced around to different people, went to see David myself, but I was always interested in what everybody thought. One of the things that I think that Nick brought up there that I really agree with, I think a relationship goes both ways in terms of, every teacher that I was ever involved with, he was also learning from me, just like I was learning from him. Yeah. Would you agree with that, Nick?
100%. I think there were things that David and I worked on early in the beginning of our relationship, which we wouldn't have worked on now.
Right. And, it was always an adventure. We call it a journey here at the academy. Yeah. It's a journey of both of us trying to help, the student and the coach, whoever that may be, get better. And, it's trial and error. One of the things that everybody's got to understand out there is there's not an exact science to this. TrackMan has helped this process. Cameras have helped this process. We couldn't see where the club face was in 1982. And when you went to see Ledbetter, you could not see where that club face was at. The shutter speed wasn't fast enough to see that. And, now we know that the club face has so much to do with where the ball is going. We assumed that in those days, but, we couldn't be exact with it.
Yeah. Another thing that, going back to the teacher player thing is that, if you look over the years, people have said, oh, well, he's trying to change his swing. He's not doing a very good job of it. And he's been going to see this guy. You can't change your golf swing. You cannot change the golf swing that you got as a kid. What you can do is you can refine it. And I think you have the extraneous moves, all the things, they come down. And eventually you get it to a stage where it's controllable and you're not hitting off the chart golf shots. So when someone says they're trying to change the swing, I don't always agree with that because if you look at my golf swing, it still looks very similar to the one I had when I was 17 years old. It's just more refined. And I think that's what happens with everyone. I think if you look at Jack Nicklaus's swing over the years, you look at Ben Hogan's golf swing, you look at all the great players over the years. As they got older, their swings got more and more refined. Bernard Langer, Jim Furyk. What an unusual golf swing. But I promise you, at the end, when he was in his mid to late 40s, he could still really, really play, and he can still play the game now. So, you learn about all those little idiosyncrasies and nuances that you have and your tendencies, and that's how you improve your golf swing. And a lot of times you need a coach to help you do that.
Yeah, Jim's U.S. Senior Open champion this year.
I know. Yeah. I know. That's how
Nick,
third or fourth leading money winner of all time.
Yeah,
with that golf swing.
It's crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
amazing. But you know what? Imagine if someone had said to him, "You're never going to get anywhere with that golf swing. You're going to have to change the golf swing. So we want you now to take the club on the inside and then come over the top of it a little bit like Bruce Litsky to counteract what you're doing." We've never heard of Jim Furyk.
Yep, that's right.
Nick, one of the things you said that we talk about a lot here is the fact that, the better the player, the better you are, the more it has to be a give and take from us, from your coach, as the coach player relationship. If you're a 20 handicap, you're coming in and can't get the ball airborne, you're going to have to basically give up your game to them or your swing to them and let them make changes. But that's what's amazing to me. Like Hal and I talk about this all the time with some of the coaches that he worked with. If he walked in the door now, I would have to ask him a million questions before I'd ever even take a stab at his golf swing. Just like if Jim Furyk walked in the door at 35, we're going to have to ask him, "Hey, Jim, when you were swinging at your best, do you have any video of it? What did it look like?" So we can kind of go back to that. One of the things to Furyk that we've said, and I'd love your take on this, if we got Jim at 13 or 14, we could have changed him. And he probably could have been okay just because of the mindset and all this stuff. Like he was so tough. If you get him at 25, 26, 27, no, not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's same for, I think any sport, but golf, but I still think if you got hold of Jimmy when he was like 8 or 9, there would still be that remnant. You would still see that move that he's got, because how he figured it out in his head. So he'd still take it back a little shut and get a little steep on the way back. Miller Barber did the same thing. We're seeing, what's the young guy now? It's Matthew Wolf. He does the same thing. His is a little more exaggerated. But, the truth is from midway down to midway through, or the backswing, the backswing and going through it. So how you get there, you can manipulate the club as much as you want, but getting it back to the same place all the time is really important.
So looking back, Nick Price today, if you were going to go back and change anything, what would you do?
I would have worked harder on my short game. I think that's one of the things I probably, like many people, go to the range and the putting green, okay, we'll go. And that's where we finish things off. But when I did start playing better in my career, it was because I started working harder on my short game. So, certainly that period of like 90 through to about 95, 96, I spent a lot of time working on my short game. And that's why I, ended up getting to number one in the world, because my short game was so good. But I think if I'd done that at a younger age, I probably would have had started my career, the success in my career earlier, but it's, I think also, you can always look at it, like half the glass, half full, half empty. Are you a product of your environment or a victim of your circumstance? So if you grow up on slow, bumpy greens and grainy greens, does that mean you're never going to win Augusta? Because that's, and I disagree. I think some people, putting is just more of a challenge. They love it more. Bobby Locke grew up on really slow, grainy greens. So did Gary Player. And, look at what they did in major championships. In fact, you look at all the guys back in the 50s who, in the 40s, they grew up on greens that were like 7 on the stimp meter. And then suddenly they'd get to a major championship when the greens were running at a 10 or 11, which was a huge change in those days, and the amount of break that they had. But, I think some people just love putting. Some people love hitting the ball, and some people love driving, and chipping and that sort of thing. So you got to try and figure the stuff where your weaknesses are, work on those so that you can enhance your strengths.
Well, to that point, in our day, if someone had said, oh, he's really a great putter, but he can't do anything else, it was almost like it was a weakness that he couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
And I mean, and if someone said, oh, he's a great ball striker, he's a great driver of the ball, it was almost like, wow, that's what I want to be, right. That's strength. And, I felt like, if I had to get it up and down, that was a weakness. I'd failed from tee to green. And, I mean, that's stinking thinking. There's no doubt about it. You just said that you'd go back and change it. But there were a lot of us that thought that way. Yeah. And victim of circumstances, I guess. I don't know.
Well, hey, when you guys both hit 18 greens around, you don't have to work on your chipping that much. It's not that important.
I've probably only done that about, I don't know how many times in my career, but not a lot on tournament play anyway.
Somebody said on Twitter the other day that you're more likely to make a hole-in-one than hit 18 greens around.
Probably.
And that might have even been PGA Tour statistics. Statistically, there's more hole-in-ones made than 18 greens in regulation. I thought that was an interesting stat.
Well, that's because, though, they're not trying to hit 18 greens. They're trying to score. If Nick Price in his prime went out there just to hit 18 greens, he could have done it.
I often say to the young guys that I play with here, that when in doubt, and you're in between clubs and you're not comfortable with an iron shot to the green, just hit it in the middle of the green. Invariably, you're never going to have longer than a 20, 25-foot putt for birdie. But, a lot of times I see guys out there going at pins where it's not the right yardage, it's not the right shape shot for them, the wind's not right, and they're still trying to hit it close. So, because I think, a lot of the mindset of the young guys nowadays is to go at every flag. They see this happening. When, like you say, on TV on Saturday and Sunday, they see you guys all making putts and hitting the ball close to the hole. Those are the highlight. That's the highlight reel. It doesn't happen every hole. You've got to have that ability to hit the ball with conviction, as I used to call it, with conservative aggression. Now, that's an oxymoron. hit it in the middle of the green, but play it like you're hitting it at the flag. And I always thought that was an important thing to do. It was like laying up on a par 5. If you didn't, okay, I'll just sort of can't get to the green, so I'll just knock one down there. And invariably the guy would lay the sod over a 5-iron or push it into the right-hand rough and not have the ability to, get a wedge on it from the perfect yardage. So, the layup into the par 5 is just as important as hitting the middle of the green.
Nick,
well, go ahead.
I got one more question, Nick. So You kind of hinted on this a little bit. We've talked a lot about mindset on this podcast and committing to the shot. Run us through how you talking and playing with the younger guys and whatnot. How did you go through your routine and commit to a shot? And how did you control your mindset when you're out there winning on tour?
Well, I worked hard with Bob Rotella because that was one of the things that he helped me probably the most with was, making sure that I was 100% committed over every shot. When I got over the ball, didn't doubt the club, didn't doubt my caddy, didn't doubt the yardage, didn't doubt anything. And if I hit the ball over the green, it wasn't because I put a bad swing on it. I was 100% committed. So the routine was really important for me, was to, if I was working on something in my golf swing where there was something in the takeaway, I'd discuss with my caddy the yardage, I'd discuss with the wind, which side we want to hit it on, with the left side or the right side of the green. And then I'd get up, and before I started my pre-shot focusing routine, I would do a little drill in the backswing after I'd taken the club out. Okay, I want to take it a little bit shallower. So I'd practice that. And then once I stood behind the ball and focused on my target, I was 100% into my target. And I never thought about the move that I was doing with the golf swing. I always felt that if I was going to forget that little bit of muscle memory in the 10 seconds before I was going to hit the shot, I didn't think that was going to happen. So I'd already pre-programmed my mind as to what I wanted the club to do. So I freed myself up to totally focus on the smallest possible target I could, whether it was a rake in a bunker that had a tooth missing from 250 yards, or whether it was a discolored piece of bark on a tree, or whether it was the bottom of a number 1 on the flag, the smallest possible target, and then be 100% committed to the club that you've got in your hand. Because I would say 85% of the bad shots I ever hit in my life was because I doubted. I doubted things, not bad swings, not necessarily bad. I just doubted and was unsure of what I had. So, and that was why I think, I always played a little quicker, because I always felt that the longer you took over it, the more time there is for this junk to go through your mind, So make your decision. And I just wish I saw people do more of this. Pick your club, make a decision, and make 100% commitment to it.
Well, Nick, we love having people on like you, because what you've done is echo what Chase and I talk about in here every day. All the great players thought this way. I mean, this is not just a Nick Price thing. This is not just a Hal Sutton thing. This is all the great players that came along. You learned from somebody how to do this. We're trying to pass this on to the younger generation out there right now. And folks, y'all heard it right there. Nick Price, the great Nick Price. I played with him. He's one of my best friends in the world. Nick, we appreciate you coming on.
Hal.
I mean, I love you, man.
Anytime, Hal, and anytime. And you know what? We need to get together a little bit more.
Yes, we do. Yes, we
and
do.
I'll come on.
Let's do something about that.
Okay, we'll do.
All right.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for coming on, Nick.
Thanks.
Well, that was fun. Like they always are. It's so interesting for me to, have access to minds like yours and to Nick Price and some of the guests we've had on here so far. Like, and you said it at the end. This isn't playing great golf. Isn't rocket science. Like you guys all sound the same when it comes to Phil sounded the same, Peter Jacobsen sounded the same, Nick Price sounded the same. You've got to commit to the shot. You've got to calm your mind down, and you've got to try to execute. And at your level, 90% of the time, it was not golf swing. It was mindset. It wasn't being committed to it.
Yeah. Well, Nick said it best. His last thoughts weren't about a swing thought. his last thoughts was target related, and that's what ends up happening all the time out on the tour. You know, you've got to trust that you've done the work with your golf swing, and now we're actually trying to score.
Yep.
And, you know, Nick talked about that, and if you didn't pick it up, go back and listen to it again. I mean, Nick's one of the great players of all time. I mean, he's smart. He had a little bit different golf swing than a lot of people, but he knew his shot pattern. He played into his shot pattern all the time.
And he talked about it. He knew his strengths. He understood his weaknesses. One of the things that kept kind of popping up in my head was how similar you guys' games were. He even mentioned it. You know, one of his regrets was not working on a short game enough. You've said that on here a bunch of times. You wish you'd have gone back and worked on it. You guys both hit it so well that you kind of just you were good enough of a ball striker to avoid your weakness. You really were.
Well, and I alluded to it in the podcast. You know, if someone said, "Oh, he's a great putter, but he's not a very good," you know, his long game isn't very good, we looked at that like it was a weakness. You know, I mean, we felt like the stronger players were the ones that could hit it really well. And I mean, you know, that's stinking thinking. You know, but you know, everybody has matured in the game. You know, we understand the game better than we ever have. And, you know, Nick and I kind of peeled the layers back to try to get to where we got to. It was hard work. And, I mean, I'm not trying to say it's easier now, but in some ways it is easier. We can peeling the layers back is not as hard as it used to be because shutter speeds of cameras and radars and things like that. I mean, we didn't have that. You know, I can't tell y'all how many times Nick and I would play a practice round together, and he'd tell me what he thought about my game, and I'd tell him what I thought about his game. That's what we had. You know, and we talked about it on there. You know, every time we went to see somebody, the teacher was learning as much from us as we were learning from them. We were on the journey of trying to get better with each person's brain. And that's what you and I talk about in here all the time. Is it's a journey, and we're going to do the best we can, but you got to participate with us.
100%. It's really hard to give a lesson to a student that gives you no feedback. It's really hard. And again, going back, you know, putting my instructor hat on for a second, like if you watch me teach a lesson to a 20 handicap and watch me teach a lesson to a +5 handicap, they're completely different. Like I'm gonna be a lot gentler with the +5 and like almost let him lead the direction that we need to go. The 20 handicap's like, dude, you got to close the face. The reason you're slicing off the plane is the face is wide open. But I mean, I'll sit back and ask. I mean, I might wait 15 or 20 minutes watching him hit balls before I say anything. Like, I got to figure this out because he's obviously really good, and there's a reason he's in here. Just like, again, we always say, if you came in here, you know, 30 years younger coming in here right now and saying, Chase, I'm struggling with my swing, it's like, I got to watch you a long time before I'm going to start cutting.
Well, there's a couple of things when you're dealing with a really, really good player, and he's already identified that because he's played in tournaments that has, you know, he's won tournaments. He comes in here, he's got pride. He's got a lot of work that's gone into what it already is.
He better have some protection, some filter.
And he's going to have boundaries. It's like there's off limits. I mean, I never went in to see a teacher that there wasn't some spot, if he started talking about it, that I wasn't going to go down that path. I'd already figured that I'm not going there. Yeah. And, you know, so as a teacher, you got to figure out what those things are and not offend him in the process.
Yep.
Because, you know, a really good player, just like Nick Price, helped David Ledbetter. You know, he talked about on there how he went to see David Ledbetter and ended up finishing second in the British Open. Had the lead with 6 holes to go. Let me tell you, that helped Nick Price, but I can't tell you how many quantum leaps David Ledbetter took because of that.
For sure.
And so when we talk about it being a journey of the coach, teacher, as well as the student, it's right on.
100%. It's a relationship, and it's something that we've talked about it being an important relationship for forever. It can't just be a one-way street either direction.
That's right.
And especially as you get better and better and better, you know, you've got to take something I failed at. You got to take more ownership and know that this is going to work for you, and you can't do something else.
Well, and sometimes, you know, I worked with predominantly, early on in my career, Jimmy Ballard some, but then later on, I worked pretty much exclusively with Floyd Horgan. I would still, like he did, he talked to Jimmy McLean, he talked to Butch Harmon. I talked to all those guys too. I can't say I officially took a lot of lessons from all those people, but I talked to them about my golf swing, and they shared their ideas with me. But I would always go back to Floyd to say, hey, he talked about this. What do you think about that? Should we implement some of that into our golf swing? I always went back to him to, let's do the work. And here's the reason why. Because I knew Floyd cared. So he might not have had all the answers. I might have been getting some answers from some other people, but I went back to do all the work with somebody that I knew cared about me.
And who knew you.
Who knew me. That's exactly right. And I think that's really good advice for many, many people out there right now. So, that's just my 2 cents.
No, I love it. Well, again, always, thanks for listening in. Like us on whatever platform you're using, whether it's Apple or Spotify or YouTube. If you guys have any questions, any feedback, as always, we love to hear all that stuff. Let us know. We've got an exciting guest for next week lined up. You guys stay tuned and listen in.
See you next week.
Be the right club today. Yes!